Well, today, we are on episode 2. So for people that didn't listen to episode 1, they need to listen to episode 1.
Correct.
But Michael, do you want to give an overview real quick about the energy balance?
Yeah.
concept?
So last episode, we talked about energy balance and kind of weight loss. And we focused specifically on like calories. And so if you remember our energy balance equation, you have energy in equals energy out.
Right.
And we broke that down as energy in equals energy used or burned plus energy stored.
Right.
And so with weight loss or weight gain or whatever, energy balance, your body is always going to move towards a level of balance.
Correct.
Okay. And so if you are taking in less energy than your body needs, it's going to handle that in one of two ways. It's either going to decrease the amount of energy you burn or decrease the amount of energy that you're storing, right? And that's, either one of those situations leads to weight loss, because if you keep this consistently lower, these two have to come lower so that they balance each other out. And so when the balance occurs, that's when weight loss kind of stops, and we call that a plateau. And so to break the plateau, we either need to increase the energy out or decrease the energy in. Same thing we did when we started.
Right.
So the more weight you lose, the more or the fewer calories you need to sustain that weight or to continue weight loss.
Right.
So calorie needs change. They're not just going to be static the whole time.
That's exactly right. And that usually makes sense, right? We tell people if you had a coal burning factory and the city needs more energy, you're going to have to burn more coal. But if the city says, I don't need that much energy, and you have all this coal there, you're going to just end up storing, right? Because you don't keep burning to waste energy. So anyway, if you want the details, you got to go back and listen to episode 1.
Yeah, we break it down, and it gets a little technical, but that's okay. It was supposed to. And so coming off of episode 1 and talking about energy, we're going to go to the next kind of step in the nutrition chain, which is macronutrients.
Yes.
And so macronutrients, we talked about them a little bit in episode 1. We didn't spend a lot of time, but macronutrients do matter.
Yes.
And so technically, you could successfully lose weight by only, manipulating calories and nothing else, technically. The problem is what's better in the long run, right? And so something that happens when you lose weight is that not all of the weight that you lose is fat.
Right.
And fat is what we want to lose, because that excess fat is what leads to all of the chronic illness, increased risk for chronic illness and all that kind of stuff. And so we want to prioritize burning fat or losing fat, not necessarily losing weight on the scale. And so, you don't just lose fat. A lot of that's going to be water. A lot of it's going to be muscle. But because muscle is more expensive for the body to keep, meaning that it burns more energy at rest, you want to keep as much of that as possible, because at the inevitable endpoint of your weight loss journey, when you get to your goal weight, you're probably going to come off of your diet somewhat, right? If you don't keep as much muscle as possible, it's going to be harder to maintain that weight because your metabolism is going to be a whole lot lower than it used to be.
Yeah.
Right. And so the macronutrients play a role in how much muscle we lose or spare. And so that's part of what we're going to focus on today.
That's, okay. So Michael, I'm just going to summarize what you just said, because I think that is a point that people have to understand. As you lose weight, your metabolism will slow down.
Yes.
Right. And so that's something people don't understand. Like, what do you mean my metabolism is trying to get to that balance spot, right? And so again, back in the day when we were losing weight, it was because of famine. Food's not there.
Yeah.
Right. And so the body's like, we got to stay alive. So metabolism will slow down so that when, you won't die, essentially.
Well, so I think that I want to draw a distinction there, because there's a difference between metabolism going down and slowing down. Right. So, and what I mean by that is when you lose weight, your body just requires less energy. And so that number goes down with your weight.
Right.
Whereas I would say slowing down would be kind of not connected to the weight.
Right.
Right. So it's like your weight's the same, your metabolism slows down, and that does occur. But I'm going to talk about that in a later episode. And I think that's the one where it's like, why is weight loss hard? And that metabolic slowing or metabolic adaptation, definitely is a thing. But I wanted to, there's a difference between metabolic adaptation and energy fluctuations based on energy needs.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make that distinction.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and that's perfect too, because again, that kind of feeds into the need to, if we want to maintain the body's ability to burn energy and keep that energy out the same, it all depends on muscle mass. That's one of the few things that we can control, is how much muscle that we carry on our body.
Yeah, it's one of the few things we can control with the resting metabolic rate. And it's definitely something we need to keep in mind. And so we can get into the macronutrients. So just to give you the definition of a macronutrient, it's a nutrient that provides energy. Okay. And so protein, carbohydrates, fats, alcohols, and we mentioned this last time, and I'll say it the exact same way, fiber does contribute a little bit of energy, but not enough to really differentiate it between anything else. So we're not going to really worry about calories from fiber, but we will talk about that and why. So the first one we want to talk about is protein.
Yes.
So protein is used in pretty much every process in the body. It's used to make hormones. It's used to make enzymes to help digest our foods and catalyze other reactions. It's used for transporting things from one place to another. It's used to build tissues, organs, muscles, and so much more. When you exercise, it stimulates muscle protein synthesis. So it helps you to build new muscle. It helps in the recovery process, not just of muscle from, a workout, but when you, cut yourself or you have a burn or whatever, some kind of injury, protein is what goes into healing that wound. And that's why, if you have a wound in the hospital, we increase the protein needs because you need more to heal that. So, it goes into increasing your lean mass, which when we say lean body mass, we just basically mean the proportion of your total weight that is not fat mass, otherwise known as fat-free mass. And so a lot of times people will say lean mass and they just think muscle. Muscle is part of lean mass, but it's, lean body mass is, bone, muscle, connective tissue, water, it's all that kind of stuff too. So, but yeah, it helps increase the strength as the muscles go up when you pair it with strength training. So protein provides 4 calories per gram. Okay. And the thermic effect of food, which we talked about last week as well, meaning the amount of energy required to digest and absorb and transport and all that kind of stuff, for protein is about 30%. And the way we worded that last time is for every 100 calories of protein you eat, you're going to burn about 30 calories to process that. Yeah. So I guess the net would be about 70.
Yeah.
And the other important thing to know about protein right now is that it tends to be the highest satiety, have the highest satiety factor, meaning that it's going to keep you feeling full longer than the other macronutrients.
Gotcha. All right. Well, let's stop here for a second, because protein, I feel like, is the one that's also all over social media. Okay. Everybody's trying to get protein goals. They need to eat more protein. Let me ask you this, Michael. Is there a difference between the types of protein? Because some people say you have to use whey. Some people use pea protein. Some people use plant protein. Some people use only red meat, carnivore protein. Does that matter that much?
Yes. So it depends. That's a good question. So animal proteins are going to be utilized by your body at a much, much higher rate than plant proteins.
Okay.
And I don't remember the exact percentage. I want to say it's around 20%. So if we eat 100 grams of animal protein, maybe 98%, somewhere in the 90s percentage wise of that is going to be utilized for, whatever. Yeah. Plant-based proteins are much, much less efficient. Like we need to, I think we get like 80% or maybe 70 to 80%. And so if you're only eating plant-based proteins, your protein needs, as far as how much you're eating, need to be increased, because you're not absorbing all of that at the same way that you would absorb animal protein. So for plant-based proteins, for vegetarians or vegans that don't eat eggs or fish or anything like that, you need more protein from the diet to account for the losses if you're trying to hit specific goals.
I gotcha.
Right.
I gotcha.
As far as whey protein, so whey protein is milk protein. It's going to absorb and digest just as well as milk would or any other animal proteins. The difference is going to come down to how full does that keep you, because it is kind of processed and kind of separated from its original form. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, processing kind of reduces how long it sits on your stomach. It reduces the amount of energy needed to process it. And so there's nothing wrong with whey protein. I don't think that there are any other proteins that perform better than whey protein.
Right.
That's not to say that whey protein performs better than all of them, but I don't think there's a significant difference when, you equate everything that matters. So whether you do whey protein or casein protein, it's probably going to be about the same for all intents and purposes.
I gotcha.
But you may not feel as full eating, 50 grams of whey protein as you would from eating 50 grams of, protein from a steak.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it sounds like with everything that you're saying, with how all these things that protein does, of the three or the main big three in alcohol, protein seems to be the most important macronutrient to get into your diet.
We'll get there.
Okay, we'll get there. All right. He's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm going to go through carbohydrates and fats real quick.
Okay, let's do that.
So just doing kind of the intro to the four. And so carbohydrates, so we talked a little bit about protein. Carbohydrates are, they're found in breads, pastas, grains, fruits, vegetables, all that kind of stuff. When we break those down, we break them down into simple sugars, and one of the primary ones is glucose. And we use glucose for energy in red blood cells, in the brain, in the muscles. Glucose, we use it all the time. And so when we use enough glucose to meet our energy needs, we store glucose, and basically our bodies chain it together into long chains called glycogen. And we store that in our muscles and in our liver. And for every gram of glycogen that we're storing, we're also storing it with about 3 to 4 grams of water. So glucose tends to be the primary energy source for muscle movement. And so like anaerobic exercise, we usually prioritize glucose over like fats or anything else.
Yes.
And so carbohydrates, just like protein, 4 calories per gram. The thermic effect of food for carbohydrates is a lot less than protein. So it's 7 to 8%. And so again, for every 100 calories, you are only going to burn about 7 to 8 calories to process all that.
Gotcha.
Any questions about that so far?
We are good on that one, because I'll come back to that too.
Okay. Fats. So we use fats for pretty much every cell membrane in our body is composed of phospholipid bilayer. So that's fat, right? And so we need fats. We also, all of our sex hormones are built from fats, and we need fats for fat soluble vitamins. We use it for energy, membrane permeability, all kinds of things we use fat for. Fat contributes 9 calories per gram. So more than double the amount of calories by volume, so per gram, than protein or carbohydrates. And the thermic effect of food from that is 2 to 3%. And so for every 100 calories of fat, you're maybe burning 2 or 3 calories to process that. So if you look at the thermic effect of food, which is an aspect of our total daily energy expenditure, if you look at protein, carbohydrates, and fat, you would see that eating more protein, you're going to spend more energy processing protein. So your thermic effect of food in a higher protein diet is going to be higher. You're going to burn more energy with your diet just from processing it from higher protein.
I see.
And so another one is fiber, which is often overlooked. And like I said, it does contribute calories, but not enough to really count because it's technically a carbohydrate. So it doesn't contribute the same amount to calories as carbohydrates because it's not fully digested. So when you look at the nutrition label, it's usually listed underneath carbohydrates. And so we just count those as carbohydrates. And so technically it's a little bit lower on the calorie thing, but it's probably safer to just count them as carbohydrates and say we're going to get 4 calories per gram from that. It's probably a little bit less. Fiber is great for all kinds of things. It helps to feed the healthy bacteria in our gut. It helps us with food motility, slowing down digestion, keeping us feeling full. It helps control blood sugar. It helps control cholesterol levels. Super good. It contributes to the thermic effect of food about the same as protein.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so roughly 30%. And so it's, really good to incorporate some fiber.
Yeah.
And then finally, alcohol, which has little to no positive benefits for the body at all, despite what Facebook tells you about drinking a glass of wine a day and all that. Like, okay, it's still not going to serve you any real, benefit, especially for weight loss. Alcohol has 7 calories per gram. And one of the bigger problems is that it impairs muscle protein synthesis. So if you're trying to build muscle or repair muscle during or after a workout, alcohol, especially excessive alcohol intake, is going to just make that harder to do. And so you're basically holding yourself back by drinking. And it also, and we'll talk about this later, it inhibits fat oxidation. So you're less likely to be burning fat when you drink alcohol.
Okay.
That still doesn't negate the calorie thing. So if you're in a calorie deficit, the net result is going to be a reduction in energy, but alcohol just doesn't make that process any easier. And high intakes suppress testosterone.
See, that's what we're telling these guys. Like, there's no reason to keep drinking all this alcohol. Again, it's affecting your muscle gains. Maybe that's why people has always attributed high alcohol to beer guts, right? Because it just stops fat from burning and it just stores right there in the middle. And again, it affects sex hormones and stuff like that. So really, if you want to drink a beer here and there, fine. But in the grand scheme of things, you're trying to get healthy. That should be one of the first. One of the first things we need to just cut out.
Yeah, especially if it's a habitual thing. And the other thing you have to think about in terms of how it directly affects decision making. It lowers your inhibitions, and you tend to make worse decisions when you're drinking excessively. And so, I was in college once, and I was not always this, specimen of health that I appear to be sometimes, pretend to be sometimes. I don't know. But, 3 a.m. Taco Bell and Waffle House runs probably don't happen as often when you're really focused on being healthy. Yeah. Alcohol tends to get you there.
Absolutely. So it sounds like that might be one of the first ones. So Michael, then let's do this. Let's prioritize them. So somebody will say, okay, we got fat, we got carbs, we got protein, we got alcohol, we got fiber. Which one, if I had a plate and I had all these things on there in a glass of wine, which one should we prioritize first?
Protein.
Yeah.
Yeah, because protein is going to be what's helping you to spare that muscle tissue that's going to increase your metabolism long term and help to prevent muscle losses. And it's just it's more filling. It contributes more to thermic effect of food. So every available metric that we have to kind of compare these macronutrients to, protein wins out hands down. So protein, I want to talk about the RDA for that. So the RDA would be the recommended dietary allowance, how much is recommended to get per day. So that is on the USDA's stuff is 0.8 grams per kilogram. That amount it should be more considered as the amount needed to prevent deficiency, not as the amount needed to perform optimally or to optimize health. Okay. And so it was established in 1980 and it has not been updated since. It does not account for the elderly, and it does not account for athletes. And there are decades of studies that have been done in multiple countries that all, looking at optimizing health conditions, say that it's too low.
Okay.
And so just wanted to put that out there. 0.8, if you just did 0.8, you'd probably be fine. But in the grand scheme of, trying to lose weight and optimize health, probably not enough. And another thing is when you, depending on how aggressive your calorie intake is, right, or your calorie deficit, your protein needs are going to go up the more aggressive your calorie deficit is, because your body is going to be trying to fight to keep up with that and make up that energy demand, right? And so you'll start to break down muscle tissue and kind of move proteins around. So if you go super aggressive, you're going to have to bump your protein up to kind of help spare that muscle even more. But yeah, so let's see. We already talked about in the long run, the more muscle you spare, the higher your metabolic rate will be, which makes it a lot easier to maintain that. And so because of all those reasons, protein is by far the most important one for weight loss right now. So we can go ahead and update our hierarchy. We got calorie deficit, and then consistency, and then protein.
I gotcha. What about that next? Should it be fiber next? Should it be, or maybe is that mainly leafy greens and stuff like that?
So I actually, I've been giving this a lot of thought, and I think that you probably could, if you were prioritizing everything, you could just lump fiber in with protein right there. And we may do that in the end.
Yeah.
Where it's like protein and fiber in the same level. And there's specific reasons for that. And I'll talk about that in just a second when we talk about what's the best diet.
Yes.
So we'll get there. But yeah, so fiber is really, really good. And we talked about why a minute ago. Carbohydrates and fat. We want to talk about prioritizing them. So which one, if protein's the most important, which one is the next most important for weight loss? Neither.
Okay.
So
neither. Okay.
Yeah. Basically, carbohydrates lead to more weight loss in the first 4 to 6 weeks. And if you remember, I set this up earlier when we talked about glycogen storage and how every gram we store is with 3 to 4 grams of water. So when you remove carbohydrates from your diet, your body is still going to want to use glucose for energy. And so it's going to start breaking off glycogen from your storage, containers, your muscles, and using that to replace what you're not getting from your diet. And so for every gram of glycogen that you break off to use for energy, you're losing 3 to 4 grams of water. And so most people take about 4 to 6 weeks to burn through all of that.
Yeah.
And so a vast majority of the weight that you're losing is all glycogen and water. Now, there may be some fat burning going on there too, but you're losing a ton of weight in the first 4 to 6 weeks. But when you take that, and let's say you have somebody that cuts out almost all their carbs, and then somebody that cuts out almost all of their fat, right? So low fat versus low carb. The low carb is going to produce more weight loss in the first 4 to 6 weeks. But when you look out 6 months, a year, 2 years, and calories and protein are the same, the amount of weight lost is exactly the same. There's literally no difference. So low carb, very fast, and then it slows down. Low fat tends to be a little bit slower, but more consistent. But in the end, exactly the same.
I gotcha. I remember reading that paper, how it's not so much right, which one? I guess we'll get to that as far as the best diets, because when you're saying low carb, low fat, I mean, you have both sides are very staunch in their diet. But that makes sense that when you do lower carbohydrate diets, most people, especially extreme low carb diets, what you lose actually a lot is just water at first, which is not exactly what we're looking for in the long run.
We want to prioritize fat loss, essentially. And so because neither of them really make a significant difference over the other, the distribution of fats and carbohydrates in your diet are going to be a lot more flexible, right? So it's going to be individualized. And so some things that you should consider when you're putting together, your macronutrient distributions and whatnot. Number one, you want to meet your protein needs.
Right.
But number two, balance out your carbs and your fat. Don't go too far in one direction or the other, because that's not going to lead to better weight loss. Find a balance that does a few things. And I have a little list of criteria that we should aim for. Number one, pick a balance that you can enjoy and perform well on. And so when I say perform well on, like I said, I've talked about my journey. When I went too low in my carbohydrates, my workouts just went, I just didn't have any strength because I wasn't storing enough glycogen to utilize that glucose for my strength training.
Right.
And so my workouts suffered and that didn't feel good. So when you go into the gym expecting to perform and you can't, it's demotivating and discouraging. And so I found, increasing my carbohydrate intake enough to power my workouts was the balance I needed. So it's not that I just went off the deep end with carbohydrates, but I needed to make sure that I felt good about my workouts. And so that is what I prioritized over the number of carbohydrates. Specifically, it was just, let me adjust this until my workouts feel good and then I feel good. So the other one is something that you can adhere to. You can cut out anything you want, but if your body is telling you that you need to have it, and you can't stick to it long term, then it's probably not going to stick long term. So you need to find a balance that is enjoyable and something that you can stick to long term. And that may look completely different from one person to the next, and that's okay.
Right.
The other thing is find something that minimizes your daily hunger, because you in a calorie deficit are going to be hungry sometimes. And you want to choose foods and a macronutrient distribution that kind of keeps that at a minimum. You want to not feel starving all the time. And so if you tend to feel better eating more fat, eat more fat. If you tend to feel better eating more carbohydrates, eat more carbohydrates. As long as you're in the calorie deficit, that really doesn't matter too much. The thing that I will say is that if we're prioritizing fiber, you're going to get fiber from carbohydrates. And so, I mean, the needs in fiber for between males and females are a little bit different. But a good goal to shoot for, just kind of in general for either, is about 30 grams a day. And so if you're meeting those fiber needs, which you're going to get from carbohydrates, that's something else to consider too. So try to eat enough carbohydrates to get some fiber in. But then after that, just kind of based on how you feel, how you're performing in the gym, if you're exercising, and then just what you can stick to.
Dang. So it sounds like right now, the things that you're saying is essentially in the middle, right? Like we get the protein right, we get the calorie deficit right, we're being able to do it consistently. The rest is just kind of based on how you feel. And I agree. I've had patients where they like the Peloton, they like to ride a bike. When they went low carb, they couldn't. I mean, the muscles need the sugar and we have none. And so they were just dying out there. So
you can do it. It's probably not easy to do, and it's probably not optimal to do. And for me, it's, if you can do it more easily and it just takes a little bit longer, but you can be more successful, why push yourself to your absolute limits and increase your risk for failure if you don't have to? Right. So, this is in my mind anyway, this is a lifelong journey. I'm not trying to reach a specific goal next week. And so, I don't have an incentive to try to just, go super, super hard. I can go just hard enough to see progress and just ride that, forever.
Yeah. Well, perfect. Well, then, Michael, based on all these things that you just said with the macros and what matters and what doesn't, there's so many diet plans out there. Is there an ideal one? Is there one that everyone should follow? Or is it kind of like what we were just saying? Like, as long as they do the deficit and get the protein intake, everything, the rest is just kind of up to whatever you feel is best for you.
Yeah. So the best diet for you is going to be one that, creates a calorie deficit, meets your protein needs, and you can stick to long term.
Gotcha. Perfect.
Like that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
The one that you can adhere to. And so adherence is going to be right up there with consistency. So when we update our little hierarchy, it'll be calorie or energy deficit, consistency, and adherence and I think we said sustainability, which I would say those are the same thing. So consistency and sustainability / adherence are right there. And then protein, and maybe if you wanted to throw fiber right there, you could. And then everything else.
Yeah. Okay. Well then, Michael, let's kind of maybe do some rapid fire stuff as we're wrapping things up. Keto.
Okay.
Carnivore. Like these diets are common right now, very popular. High protein, some of them really high fat, some have no plants at all. I think a lot of this comes from that what we call the insulin carbohydrate model. Do you want to spend some time talking about this concept of why eating this way may help or may not help? Or
so the carbohydrate insulin model, and this is, basically what it says is when you eat carbohydrates, your insulin levels go up. And insulin is what's helping to drive fat into fat cells, right? Or anything into fat cells. And that's true.
Right.
But that's not the whole picture, because insulin isn't the only thing that's driving fat into fat cells. And so what they basically say is if you're eating more carbs, you're going to be storing more fat. The problem is that works the other way too, though. It's if you are eating, so what they are proposing is that you eat less carbohydrates to keep your insulin lower, and then you won't store fat. If you're in a calorie deficit, that is true. You won't store fat in a calorie deficit. But if you're in a calorie surplus, it doesn't matter if you don't eat enough carbs.
Right.
You're going to be storing fat. And that's kind of the thing with the carbohydrate insulin model is the people that are proponents of this, they don't agree with the whole calories in, calories out thing. And they say that it's more about insulin than it is about calories.
Right.
And that's not true. So for me, you mentioned the coal fire thing earlier, and I have this thing with, I use like a wood burning fireplace, right? Or a gas fireplace. So if you eat more fat in your diet, your body is going to burn more fat because that's the fuel you're giving it, right? If you eat more carbohydrates, you're going to burn more carbohydrates. That's the fuel you're giving it, right? And that has to do with oxidation prioritization, which I can talk about in a second. But basically, if you eat a whole lot of fat, your body is going to burn more fat. That doesn't mean it's going to lose more weight. It just means it's going to burn more fat because that's what you're doing. So that's like saying that your gas fireplace is better than a wood fireplace because it burns more gas. It's like it's putting out the same heat.
Correct.
It's functioning exactly the same.
Right.
You're just using a different fuel source. So when I say oxidation, that just means what your body is breaking down for energy right now. And that priority kind of mirrors our body's storage capacity. And so alcohol, we don't store at all. And so earlier I said alcohol prevents fat oxidation.
Right.
It also prevents protein and carbohydrate oxidation as well. And so when you drink alcohol, your body is going to prioritize burning that off like right now because it can't put it anywhere. And then after that is protein. We don't really have short-term storage, not a whole lot anyway, for protein. So any kind of excesses in protein are going to be kind of oxidized there and kind of put different places. Carbohydrates have a lot of storage capacity. So we are going to kind of hold on to those because we have places to put those, right? Muscles, liver, other places. But that's kind of finite. We only have so much storage capacity for that. So once those are full, we're just going to start burning all that excess off as energy. Well, we have, as far as I'm aware, limitless capacity to store fat. We just keep pumping out new fat cells and creating new storage space, right? And so if you're in an energy surplus, your body's just going to work down that prioritization line and until it gets to fats when it has nothing else left to oxidize. But if it has more than it needs, it's just going to put those back into fat cells. Now, that's not to say that if you're eating, zero fat, that you're not going to burn fat. Fat moves in and out of your fat cells all day long. And what you're using for energy at any particular time fluctuates based on what you're doing, right? And so, at the end of the day, whether you're low carb, low fat, you're going to go down this line of prioritization. And if there's not enough left to put into the cells, you're going to not put anything back in there. And so it's more about the rate of fat moving out of your cells and moving into your cells. You want more to move out than you want to move in. So at the end of the day, that's kind of the same thing as energy. Balance is, or, you know, an energy deficit is you want less coming in than you have going out.
Yeah. Dang. See, fascinating. So again, I think this helps people again realize, and I like how we just kind of at the end of the podcast, we again put in there are things that matter the most, right? Deficit still matters, right?
Still matters.
Yeah. So people who do keto or carnivore or whatever, what they might realize is they're having so much protein, they're getting full, and that makes their deficit more impressive, and hence they lose. But in the grand scheme of what happens in 6 months, lifelong, it doesn't matter that much.
And we see this all the time with like keto and carnivore, where people lose weight, but then their cholesterol levels go through the roof because most of the foods they're eating are high in like saturated fats, which is going to contribute to that, you know, cholesterol and increase your risk for heart disease, right? And so, yeah, you might lose weight on it because like you said, you're full because you're eating so much protein, but you're missing out on a lot of, you know, very important nutrients. And so going too far in one direction or the other is not good. And I actually did talk to a dietitian friend of mine who, she said that I should probably do a whole episode on micronutrients. And I'm like, that is a level of detail that I don't even want to go into with micronutrients because there are a ton of them.
Right.
But if you're prioritizing balancing things, right? Fruits and vegetables, whole grains, good proteins, balance of carbs and fats, you know, all of that kind of stuff, you're probably not going to have to worry about micronutrients.
Absolutely.
And so for the purposes of this podcast series, we're not going to talk a lot about micronutrients because if you're doing a good balance of foods, you're probably okay.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And that's our goal. We usually, when we our spiel on multivitamins is if you can get it from the food, much better to get it from the food. It's balanced for you already.
Right.
A lot of people, when they're taking multivitamins, they're taking so many different ones, and they'll look like zinc 2,000 daily percentile. I'm like, why do we need 2,000% of daily value? Yeah.
So there's a difference. So earlier we talked about the difference in animal protein versus plant proteins as far as our ability to absorb and utilize that. There's a difference between food sources of vitamins and then supplemental sources.
Yep.
And so the reason it'll say like 2,000% is you may be absorbing about 10% of that.
Right.
It's not that much.
Exactly.
And so a supplement is not meant to replace. It's meant to supplement, hence the name supplement.
Yeah.
But if you're doing everything else right, if we wanted to throw that in to our hierarchy, supplement would be like dead last.
Yeah.
Like prioritize the food and everything else before supplements are ever going to be necessary.
For sure. Yeah. No, I say you rather spend your money on better quality food than to buy a bunch of supplements.
100%.
Yeah.
Especially from some of these places, man. They arm and a leg in this economy.
Yeah. I know. Inflation's high, man. We don't have time for that. All right, Michael, any final thoughts wrapping up this episode?
Again, I will work on getting a kind of a visual presentation for a lot of this information, and we'll put it in the show notes. Yep. And, you know, if we said something that was not entirely clear, or if you have questions about anything, let us know. And I would love to do, like I said last time, I would love to do a Q&A where we answer, you know, listener questions.
Yeah. So I think that would be really good.
Yeah.
So.
I'm going to keep saying it at the end of every episode because I want it to happen.
Awesome.
Which I'm kind of scared of because you never know what people are going to ask.
Yeah.
I get some wild questions, you know, in my coaching, but that's kind of the fun part.
For sure.
Always learning.
Yeah. Well, Michael, what are we doing next? Do we already have an idea for that one?
I do. It'll be exercise. And so
Don't miss that one. Yes.
I know that you recently did a few episodes outside of this series, but on exercise and strength training and muscle building and everything. So there will probably be a little bit of overlap there. So the focus of the exercise conversation we're going to try to have is going to be on weight loss specifically.
There you go. Yes.
So lots of benefits to exercise.
For sure.
We're going to focus in on the how that pertains to weight loss specifically.
Awesome. Well, another episode done. Exercise is going to be a great one.
I think so too. I'm looking forward to it. I really enjoyed doing the research and putting that information together. So I can't wait to share it.
Perfect. Thanks, man.
Thank you.